character style mashup challenge. We have to 3D model Dr. Robotnik in the style of Kim Possible. What does that look like? This is gonna be something, I'll tell you that. All right, first off, reference, and we spent a surprising amount of time on Google just trying to figure out if this mashup would even be doable or not. I even polled my stream chat at one point to ask if we should respin the wheels, and they said yes, just because of how different these characters are, but I didn't feel comfortable throwing in the towel that early, and we kind of lucked into these Kim Possible style guide drawings that just ended up being extremely helpful. There was even this character on one of them that sort of matched the general shape of what I might picture Dr. Robotnik would look like in the Kim Possible universe. So we ended up really using that more as our reference than Kim Possible herself. And the key takeaways from the Kim Possible style are these smooth flowing curves that go from the body all the way down to the feet. And then a lot of Kim Possible characters also have these teeny tiny little feet. So those were the general shapes that I tried to match while still keeping his recognizable aspects like his mustache, his goggles, and his jacket. And overall, I'm pretty happy with where this came up. We were really pressed for time. I was already like an hour into this challenge, and I'm trying to do this whole thing in the span of one stream, so I was really starting to feel the clock tick. So we just had to kind of get something usable at this point. And then I did sketch him out in the pose that we wanted to sculpt as well. And then we took that and hopped into Blender and slapped down a sphere for the head, the body, the arms, and the legs. And for this one specifically, I decided to sculpt him in pose towards the camera. A lot of the times I will do T-pose and then pose them later, but for the Kim Possible style, it was so important to me to get those really clear, defined flowing curves across the whole body. I felt like T-pose might be a little bit counterproductive. So we sculpted him in pose to the camera, got the volumes in the general right place before joining and remeshing. Then I just spent a decent amount of time sort of smoothing out the intersections and sort of working on the shapes to get it into a usable state as a base mesh. Then I did start working on the face a little bit early here, just kind of punching out the nose and punching in the eyes, and then sort of working on that big honkin' recognizable nose along with his mouth. And the mouth did pose somewhat of a challenge for me here because Dr. Robotnik does not have a neck, kind of like No Neck Ed in 90 Day Fiancé. So I'm used to sculpting out like the jawline and all the proper musculature and whatnot, but for this one specifically, we just went straight from the mouth to the body, which was pretty wild. And I spent way too long just trying to get the general shapes in the right place here, because I did not feel comfortable moving on to any sort of real detail until we had the right shapes. I box modeled a foot to try to get the flat base there, remeshed it on, and then realized that I didn't remesh with a high enough resolution and completely botched what I had done on the face earlier. So that was a little heartbreaking. At this point, I wanted to go ahead and get the iconic mustache in place because it was so vital to his character that I didn't really want to slap it on later and have it feel like it didn't really belong. So I wanted to get that in as early as possible. Then I started working on the face detail, trying to get the sharp curves in place. And I spent a lot of time really trying to get clear, defined curves along like the brow and the bridge of the nose and anywhere that they would fit, because Kim Possible's style has, again, these really clear, defined, flowing curves. And I wanted to sort of bring that into our sculpture as much as possible without adding any actual outlines to it. And I probably spent a little bit too long just trying to get the body the right shape here because I was a little bit scared of moving on to the clothing. For the eyes, or the glasses I should say, I used some extruded cylinders and then bridged across with a Bezier curve, similar to the mustache, but for glasses instead. And then we moved on to the clothes. And finally, which I decided to do a mask extraction for. And I had to do this twice because I originally masked around the nubs of the arm, but then realized that I probably wanted the sleeves to be open. So I undid it, redid the mask, extracted it, solidified it, remeshed it, and then sort of inflated around the clothes to make them really sort of more off the body. For the zipper, I did a cube and then used geometry nodes on a curve to lay that beveled cube along the curve as the zipper. I think it turned out pretty decent. Lots of moving back and forth, just working on different things. And at this point, I realized I really wanted the head, the body, and the legs to be separate. So I sort of cut those out as individual objects, just in case I needed to remesh anything in particular, it wouldn't affect the other parts of his body negatively. The feet here, I kept making smaller and smaller as we got throughout the challenge. And then I hopped back up to the face and really tried to focus on defining those shapes. Specifically, again, those hard-edged curves. I think that was really important to the style. The teeth, I did an extruded circle, separated the edges around each of the faces, then extruded them in depth so that we had like this entire teeth object. And then I duplicated those around to the lower jaw. And here, I really wanted those eyebrows to pop out over his glasses, so I spent a lot of time making those look correct. And then a lot of the effort from here on out is just detailing, just hopping from place to place on Dr. Robotnik here, adding different details like the seams in his jacket and whatnot. For the cuffs, I just box modeled those on his wrists. And then you're about to see the absolute mess that his hand geometry is. At this point in the sculpt, I was really starting to feel the clock tick. I felt like I was running out of time. So we just like really hastily threw together a really bad box modeled hand and then sort of mushed it into the right shape and shoved it into the cuffs. At this point, I did want to start getting some of the colors in place, and I really tried hard to match the muted color scheme of Kim Possible, so that's why you see me hopping back and forth between Google a lot. I used a different Bezier curve profile for the mustache to make it feel like more stylized hair rather than just like these bulgy tubes. And then for the lights, I used a really powerful area light behind him for the rim, and a really soft sun for the key light. That usually ends up looking pretty good for these renders. For the rest of the stream here, it's pretty much just detailing things up and really refining the shapes. I did have a particularly difficult time working on the feet and getting the hard surface models in place. I do want to shout out Polyhaven real quick. That's where I get all of my HDRI images for lighting. And I was able to grab something that I thought looked kind of like a robotics lab that he might fit in. But again, the rest of this is pretty much just detailing up at this point. So I'm going to take a second here to plug. If you enjoy these kinds of time lapses or breakdowns, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. And please check out some of my other videos while you're on the channel. We have a couple of these and I think they all turned out pretty cool. So for the clasps here, I did a beveled box and then just sort of wrapped a Bezier curve around his body, not bottle, that I used a bevel profile for. That turned out pretty cool. And it was really once we started getting all these details in place that the whole thing started actually coming together. Because before this, it was pretty much just his face that was really detailed. And the rest of this is a lot of just like sculpting extra details and really sharpening those curves. I was really dead set on getting those like defined curves in place. For the boots there, you'll see that I had vertex painted a mask. Rather than vertex painting the color of the object, I like to vertex paint black and white masks and then use those masks to define the colors in the material. It makes it easier for me to change things later. So lots of sculpting around the face. Again, just trying really hard to get those defined shapes in place. And then you'll notice later, I also vertex painted his nose. That should come up here in a second, just so we could get his nose a little bit redder than the rest of his face. Which I guess I spent a lot more time on the detail here than I thought I did. But here's the nose. We vertex painted the nose out to make it a little bit redder than the rest of the face. And then the next big thing I want to talk about is the glasses. I found that I didn't really like the natural reflections on the glasses, so I made them a diffuse material and then used a diagonal gradient on the masks with a color ramp node in the material editor with hard transitions to just make this like a really cartoony looking reflection, and I think that really kind of tied the final look together. This is about where we ended up. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I don't know that it necessarily matched the Kim Possible style, but I do think the two character styles being sort of blended together kind of came up with this whole new, really cool thing. And I'm pretty happy with how this came out for one morning's worth of work. Other than that, that's pretty much it. I guess I'll catch you in the next one.